Yeah.
That's all right. I'll throw him in there again. He's a good dude.
Yeah.
He's he's busy. He's a busy man. But his podcasts are good.
I hope to be very soon.
Yeah, I will be.
Although it started ramping up now that all of the pieces of this puzzle are starting to converge on one another. You know, with the GoFundMe launch next Thursday. Then once we get some capital rolling in, I'll be able to really start making, you know, go for land acquisition and get lawyers hired and project managers hired and everything else. It's
good.
We're heading in that direction anyway.
Good. We got a lot to talk about.
Yes, we do.
Benjamin Lee, how you doing?
David, I am so happy to be here, actually.
This is cool. I'm a little bit nervous. I'm a little bit excited. I'm a little bit nervous because this is like a big deal. There's a lot of information.
You're nervous.
Oh, yeah.
This is my first podcast ever.
So I'm because I talk to other people and I kind of know them and we're just having fun with it. Last time I talked to Leon Collins about astronomy, which was like whatever. We're talking space and moons and stuff. But this is a little bit more important because this could actually have an impact on the entire, not just country, but possibly the world's future of how we live our lives. I mean, literally, right?
I'm hoping so.
Because electricity runs everything in our life, absolutely everything, which is great because we have a lot of cool modern conveniences and healthcare and all this wonderful technology. But at the same time, if we don't have electricity, we got some problems. So with that, why don't you? I want to start here. Why don't you give me a little bit of background about who's Benjamin Lee, and how did you get to this point in your life of where you like, listen, we have a problem here with energy and I'm going to try to fix it?
But that could be an entire episode in and of itself, so I'll try to be succinct with this. I am a retired Air Force bomb squad technician. That's actually what I do by trade, is defuse bombs. I did 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. Joined when I was 17, only a few years after September 11th. You know, I like to say I'm patriotic. These last few years, it's been wavering a little bit, but
sure.
That's the reason I'm doing what I'm doing, is to try to reignite that excitement back in the world that used to be there. But then when I got out of the service back in 2014, I started doing general contracting work with my brother, who had a general contracting business. And like, I love building things. Like, that sort of stuff just makes sense to me, you know?
Yeah.
And during the pandemic, or at the start of the pandemic, you know, it was just too much of a pain to be doing general contracting work inside people's houses and starting new renovation projects. So I actually used YouTube and taught myself how to do like fine woodworking. So I started making mantle pieces and, you know, pieces of furniture and stuff. And then I liked the engineering aspect of it. So I actually moved into making fine furniture that had hidden gun compartments in it. So
cool.
like gun safety storage.
I got to hook you up with my possibly soon to be son-in-law. Anyway, you might be interested in furniture like that, but go ahead.
I don't make it anymore. I don't have the time for that anymore. But so I had like a woodworking shop that was in like a carport, because I was like, you know, recovering from getting out of the military. And look, we had a bad windstorm one day and it just completely demolished my wood shop. And I was like, well, time to pick a new direction. So I was like, you know, electrical work has always interested me. I saw electricians, you know, doing the general contracting work. So I decided to become an electrician's apprentice. So I trained under an electrician for about a year and then went to trade school to, you know, do the schooling portion of becoming an electrician. And it was while I was in trade school that I started noticing some heavy inefficiencies in our nation's solar development strategy, mainly being we don't have one. Like, we're devoting billions of dollars to renewable energy, and there is no coordination whatsoever in the strategy. I mean, it's just fly-by-night companies are popping up everywhere. The money, huge amounts of money are going to them. They're mismanaging their funds. Projects are going sideways. It's like, there's no coordination to the strategy that we're having. We keep talking about moving away from fossil fuels, you know, and we think that we're going to be able to just legislate ourselves into a world where fossil fuels don't exist. That's not the case. We need actionable, clear strategies that are going to get us from point A to point B. Like, that's the only way we're going to get there.
Right.
So I actually dropped out of trade school, figured out how I could enact my vision of an energy independent America and figured out how to create the framework of a nonprofit incorporation. And like, God, the last year and a half, that's what I've been doing, is just teaching myself how to be a corporate man and put pieces of the puzzle together. And now we're at the point where we're ready to start fundraising and start putting this plan into action.
And I think you touch on something, I think, which is probably really important, is that we can't legislate ourselves. And I think that's been a trend, not just in, energy, but in a lot of things, where if there's some sort of a problem or somebody doesn't like something, there's a law passed, or there's a rule passed, or there's a mandate passed, or something like that, which maybe some people are happy about it, but then it pisses off a lot of other people. But at the end of the day, it never really fixes the problem, right? It never really fixes the root cause of this issue, and that could be for health, that could be for a lot of things. I mean, there's a lot of problems here that we have to look back, and it may be a little bit harder to do that, but there's got to be a better way to not, instead of just like mandating that everybody drives an electric car. That's not really our problem, right? We got to find out really other stuff that's going on. So you started this nonprofit to try to help solve this problem.
Correct.
And it's based on solar power, and it's a nonprofit, which is the first of its kind in the industry, which is kind of cool.
And power generation, yes.
Power generation. So a lot of people are saying, well, how does that all work? And you kind of, when we met at a SCORE event, SCORE is a local, if nobody knows, is a local sort of business helping thing for the state of Connecticut. And so we met there. There was a presentation there going on, and we started talking about it, and it piqued my interest about you sent me a PDF with a lot of pages on it, and I'm trying to wrap my head around it, and I think I got sort of the basis of it, is where you start the business with some crowdfunding and some government grants, and you're going to employ people to help you to do that. But then it eventually it's going to be self-sufficient, right? So I have a question, because you're going to explain this all to us, but I have a question for you. When it becomes self-sufficient, because of that, some of that self-sufficiency is selling the power that's generated back to the utility companies. Is that correct? Do I have that right?
Correct.
Is there going to come a point where you're going to are you going to replace the power companies? And then who are you going to sell the power to? So why don't we start there? Okay,
I'll touch on that first, and then we can
perfect.
do a rewind and come back to what was the original question?
It's just like
how it all works.
How it all works.
Yeah,
How you base your nonprofit.
So we will never replace utilities, mainly because people have a misconception of the way that utilities actually work. Utilities, at least most of them, don't even generate their own power. Like, they're the people who build and maintain the power lines that get our electricity from point A to point B. So like here in Connecticut, a lot of people don't know this, but here in Connecticut, the reason that most of our state's energy is so expensive isn't necessarily because the power itself is expensive. It's because Eversource has to buy that power from out of state and then transmit it down to Connecticut. So where you're getting hit is actually in your delivery fees, not in the actual cost of the power. Now, we do have the highest cost per watt in the nation, so that isn't helping us either, but the delivery fees in and of itself are the reason why our power bills here are particularly bad. But that's why increasing the amount of decentralized power production that we have in the country is so important to reducing and then eliminating, energy costs here in the United States, is because if we can take energy from right down the road and bring it to your house, obviously it's much cheaper to get it there than if we're, getting it up in New Hampshire and then bringing it all the way down to Connecticut. I understand why it exists the way it does. That's capitalism, but sure. That's why we need to be smart about the way that we're capitalizing on this transition away from fossil fuels into renewables. If we're smart about the way that we orchestrate this transition, we can do some amazing things here in this country. The rest of the world looks at us and thinks that we're never going to get our stuff together. It's like, let's prove them wrong. Sure. Let's go, hey, let's all get behind this and say, let's do things a smarter way. But so then to backpedal to the original question, which is, how does this all work?
Right. Yeah, there's a lot, and those I'm going to share a link if it's cool with you to a PDF or something that your website that's going to just sort of explain all this.
That will
because
be,
it is there's a lot to learn.
If you go to solarsecuritynet.com, like right there on the home page, there's our 3 mission statements, and at the top mission statement, the phase 1 operations plan is that PDF that I had sent you.
Right.
So that'll be available there. I think the easiest way to explain this is to explain how for-profit energy generation works right now, like renewable energy generation. So, because our method actually isn't much different than the for-profit method, it's just, so there's a lot of government subsidies that exist right now, which a lot of large solar companies are capitalizing on, both rooftop and utility scale.
Before you go any further, I read in that PDF, and I just want to make, because this is going to help you explain and for people to understand. You would think that solar generation is sort of the same, but there's a different value or something, rooftop residential as opposed to commercial generation. Is that right?
That is 100% correct.
Can we kind of start there? I think that might help.
Sure. So
sorry to interrupt.
No. This is good because my brain is looking at this from a 40,000 foot view. Like, it's good to have you reel me in.
Good.
So there is a huge cost gap between the difference in rooftop solar development and utility scale solar development. So right now, these numbers might be a little outdated for anybody who's listening, but residential solar development clocks in at about $3 per watt generated. But commercial scale or utility scale solar development is around 89 cents per watt generated.
Now, how is that calculated? Is that because of, well, I don't know. So
because everything that goes into that. So like for a household, you have to calculate the costs of your meter, your inverters, all of the photovoltaic panels, the work that goes into installing them, any fees that are associated with getting your panels hooked up to the grid. And then you divide all that by the amount of power that you're generating, and it gives you a value of how much it costs per watt to install that. The reason that utility scale is so much cheaper is because it's efficacy of scale, essentially. So you're building everything in one place. You're having one installer manage your entire project. You only have one grid tie to worry about. So it's essentially efficacy of scale.
It probably gets to a point where eventually you get big enough where the bigger you get, the smaller the number the price is going to be.
100%.
It's kind of like that. It's kind of like buying in bulk at like Costco.
That's exactly right. So you're getting, your wholesale value instead of your retail value is essentially how it works. Not to mention that most of the rooftop industry, the power purchase agreements and the net metering arrangements are normally done through the companies that are installing these panels. So it's not always, actually, most of the time, it's not in the best interest of the people who owns the house that they're going on. That's just an unfortunate reality of the way that these companies have cornered the market. I'm sure it's no surprise to anybody that solar has a very bad stigma attached to it these days. In fact, me naming the nonprofit the Solar Security Net, well, I mean, it's because I want my program to reinforce the future of America's Social Security, but with renewable energy revenue. But then people hear, as soon as they hear the word solar, people will go, "Oh, you'll never believe how many people come to my front door." And it's like, that's not what I do. We have so the biggest fight I've had is actually fighting against the predatory stigma of the solar industry. And again, I don't necessarily blame anybody for that. It's just, it's a product of the way that we've been developing solar.
Sure.
So I'm just hoping to change that.
Cool. I like it. Yeah, a couple of colleagues of mine used to work in the solar. They're installers, and they got out of the business. And I know, just doing what I do, I met some solar people, and there has been a lot of blowback recently of people installing solar panels and they don't work, or they're not whatever. And there's also something in Connecticut. Maybe you can clarify this for me, because another colleague of mine moved to New Hampshire, and he wanted to live off grid. What is it? New Hampshire, live free or die kind of thing. Which is, anyway. So he put solar panels up, and the electric utility company came. He says, hey, do you want to hook those up to the grid so you can, he's like, no, I don't want to hook this up to the grid. Like, I want to be in self-sufficient. But there's a law here in Connecticut, right, that if you have to connect to the grid.
Correct.
Now, why is that? Why can't I just go, if I have a couple acres or just my roof, and throw up some solar panels? How come I can't? Do you know the answer to that? Why can't I just, why is it necessary for me to connect to the grid?
I have not looked into what the notes are on that specific piece of legislature, if there are any. I could hazard a few guesses as to why, or I guess if I can play devil's advocate, I guess, and say like, well, you wouldn't want to have a house permanently disconnected from the grid because what if you sell it, somebody else moves in, and then they have severe medical necessities where they cannot rely on the unstable reliability of solar. So like I could give you devil's advocate arguments, but in terms of like a solid reason, no, I can't give you one, because a lot of other states aren't that way. If you want to live off grid, you live off grid,
knock yourself out.
But you're 100% correct. Here in Connecticut, if you have photovoltaic systems, I keep saying that, if you have solar systems, yes, it has to be connected to the grid. So yeah, I don't know why.
I don't know. We can get into it because there's a bunch of other stuff where you still have to pay or whatever. I don't really understand how all that works, but we're not here for that. I want to learn more about. Okay, so you buy a piece of land,
correct,
through money you've raised through either grants or crowdfunding or both, and you hire a local contractor and you start building out. How big are these lots you're looking for? How big are these? Because there's this thing now where people complain like, well, there's a beautiful green pasture and you can put solar panels all over it. So what's your plan?
Well, there's what my goal is and what reality might be. There is a lot of, I would like to stay away from touching any forest land or any agricultural land. So the concept behind having a solar security network is for-profit energy developers like to get their biggest bang for their buck, as you were just talking about wholesale-wise. So they will try to find the largest piece of land that they have to put the least amount of money into developing to make it viable for solar. We, on the other hand, have one advantage that they don't, and that's for-profit energy developers have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders, because their shareholders and investors are the ones that are making up the majority of the initial investment funding that's going into making that field up. So on the front end, they're not going to put any more money into that field than they have to start putting out as much money on the back end as they can. Me, as the CEO of a nonprofit, my responsibility is to fulfilling my charitable purpose. And if my charitable purpose is to providing free energy to disadvantaged communities, that means I can justify a higher upfront cost to developing land that other solar developers wouldn't necessarily look at. So I'm looking at exploited sand and gravel quarries, pieces of land that have just been sitting there for decades. I mean, we're looking at our first prototype field in Andover, Connecticut. There's about 120 acres there. It's land that hasn't been touched literally for 40 years. It's in an area where nobody would see it. It's close to a current grid connection. Like, there are typically, it takes about 4 to 5 acres to build 1 megawatt of energy. So for the larger utility scale fields, these companies are looking for 400, 500, 600 acre pieces. But the way that energy generation is going is actually the way of virtual net metering programs and virtual power plants. So all of your power generation do not have to be in the same physical location. So if instead of finding a 400 acre plot of land, I can find 8 50-acre plots of land, or more reasonably, probably 4 100 acres, build the same amount of solar infrastructure, and then still deliver that energy to the same spot as if it were all in one area. So we as a nonprofit actually have latitude that the for-profit companies don't. But that also comes down to grid infrastructure, because I'm sure most people are aware of how outdated and poor America's grid infrastructure is. And because our utility companies are managed in the same way that a for-profit company is, because they are for-profit companies, it is not necessarily their priority to make sure that grid infrastructure is updated to accept new forms of renewable energy. So sometimes solar projects will sit for 5, 6, 7 years waiting for the utility companies to update grid infrastructure before they can hook in. We as a nonprofit, again, because we can justify upfront expenditures, we can go to these utility companies and say, hey, we'll front half the bill for these grid upgrades because my responsibility is to get this energy to where it needs to go. So we actually are going to form relationships with utility companies. We're not looking to step on anybody's toes. We're actually looking to do what's in everybody's best interest for everyone involved, including the solar developers that are already building these fields. Like, we're not going to own any of the companies doing any of the construction. We're simply the fundraiser, the people who write the checks, and then the energy managers. So
you don't own any, you're not going to own the land?
we will own the land. So we're the land holders and energy holders. But like the actual construction company, the electrical contractors that would be building these fields, we're not going to own any of those companies. So that's one rule I made up front for any of my officers or executives is you don't get to benefit in any way from us constructing this massive field of solar infrastructure.
Now, what about all the panels and everything? Is that do you own that? Do you buy all that stuff?
Correct. The equipment
So
itself
the
would be
physical,
owned.
the land and all the physical equipment, excluding the transmission part of it.
Correct. But all of the work is subcontracted.
All the work subcontracted. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Because we're trying to keep the administrative overhead for the nonprofit itself as low as possible. Like, we're going, before we started, we were talking about introducing AI into healthcare.
Right.
I want to go that route and try to minimize our corporate overhead as much as possible. That way, we're already creating a charity method in which we're going to give over 600% out versus what we take in, and I want to keep that number as high as possible. I don't want to be one of those charities that gives 12% of what we take in out. Right. I want to give the most amount of relief as possible for every single dollar that we take in. That's my goal anyway.
So on the surface, it sounds really good. So I shouldn't say on the surface, but it sounds really good. And it sounds like, okay, you're going to raise some money. You're going to build out these power generation fields, I'll call them, connect to the grid. You're going to help the utility companies with that expense. Now you're able to get your electricity out to the communities that need it, and you're going to service underprivileged communities first, which is great. So, but then you just mentioned that a lot of nonprofits, they have administrative costs, so they take in $100, and then maybe 60% goes to their cause, and 40% goes to them, or whatever the ratio, and it's different, right? So not 100% is going.
Correct.
You want to change that. You don't want to give just 100%. You want to give more than that. So how does that the money thing is interesting, right? Because you said utility companies are in it for the money. They're a for-profit business, right? So they're generating, so they want to keep their costs low and their profits high, or however, whatever that is. You're a little bit different. The people come first. You want to make sure they get good, clean, free energy. So, explain to me the money part of that. How does that eventually, once you get up and running, how does that over time, like in 10 years kind of timeline, like where are you?
Okay, this is a great place to step back to how for-profit versus how our model is going to work. So the fact that for-profit energy generation works should just go to highlight that there is viability in revenue production in energy. Energy is worth a lot of money right now. So the way that for-profit energy development would typically work is somebody would find a piece of land, same as we are. Somebody would do a solar viability study, same as we are, decide how much panels they can get on that piece of land, and then they would put the budget together, and then they would start approaching investors, or if they have shareholders in that company, start diverting money from that company in towards that particular project. So to go a little bit back towards the charity thing, say, for instance, a regular charity gets $30 million. If the average charity in the United States will put out 65%, that's average. So you're talking only 19.5 million of that 30 million is going to reach who it needs to reach. If we take in $30 million, typically it costs about $1 million per megawatt to generate. So that 30 million, we could generate a 30 megawatt field. that 30 megawatt field over the 25-year lifespan of it generating power is going to produce almost $190 million worth of energy. So if we're taking that top half of energy, selling it and building more fields, taking the bottom half of energy and distributing it to disadvantaged communities, at a minimum, we're distributing 300% of the amount of money that we took in. So that just on its surface, that's how it works. We're just using the revenue viability of energy generation, but changing it into a charitable method. So for-profit energy, there's a lot of very valuable government subsidizations that are available right now. Until I believe it's 2038, there is something called an investment tax credit. So anybody who's building a renewable energy system, upon completion of that renewable energy system, will get back 30% of the overall value in a tax credit. So again, say I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. I'm not going to do that. What I will say is for-profit companies utilize this investment tax credit to make back 30% of that initial investment. So that's how they're making a large chunk of their money up front from these fields, because as soon as they can grid tie them, they're getting 30% of that money back either through a tax rebate or they're just able to apply it to their corporation, for a tax exemption of 30% of the overall cost. Then the other 70% of that field is where they will fill in the gap with shareholders or investors. And then as soon as this grid tie, any of the energy they generate is sold, and then whatever revenue they make is given out as dividends and cut to their shareholders. The way that we're going to work is much the same way, except there's actually a unique part of do you know what the Inflation Reduction Act is?
I don't know the details, but yes.
Essentially, just generally, the Inflation Reduction Act is a piece of legislation that the Biden administration enacted, and most of it was like $32 billion, but I think $27 billion of it was earmarked for greenhouse gas reduction programs. So essentially renewable energy infrastructure. Right. And as part of the Inflation Reduction Act, they actually added a stipulation in there that makes investment tax credits transferable. So if I'm a company and I build and I get 30% tax credits back, I can actually take that 30% tax credit, give it to another company, and they give me money and they get to keep the tax credit.
Okay. I think. Not really.
So if there's two people who owe taxes,
okay,
and say this person doesn't need the tax credit anymore, or, for whatever reason, they don't need the entire value of that tax credit to get down to zero on their tax bill. They can take whatever's remaining or the entire amount and essentially sell that tax credit to another organization.
Oh, I got you. Okay. Yeah. Gotcha.
Now, because we're a 501c3, we don't need tax credits, which means we can take 100% of that investment tax credit, create relationships with corporations who want to invest into a green future, and then that gives us 30% of the investment that we need for our fields right up front. So as you were saying, we're going to be using crowdfunding for land acquisition and site development, and then permitting fees and anything else like that. We don't necessarily need to, but the reason I want to do it that way is to get the local communities involved in these projects. Like when I say I want this to be a national group project, I 100% mean it. I want people to share this idea, get involved in the idea, help find sites that are suitable for our fields. If you're a solar developer, look into the viability of sites in your area, and we'll even work with you to maybe hire your company if you do some of that legwork for us. Like, I want this to be a all hands on deck situation, because if we can divert enough resources into this program over the course of the next 10, 15 years, we'll be well on our way to eliminating every residential energy bill in the United States.
So how is your relationship with, let's say, here in Connecticut, we have Eversource, right? So how's that relationship? What's that conversation going to be like with them? Because right now they're getting their power from, some local, some, like you said, New Hampshire, wherever it's coming from. So it's a little bit depending on, I guess, where it's being distributed, right? It depends on where they get it from. So what's that conversation going to be like? Is it going to be like, hey, Eversource, you know, I know you're buying power from, you know, Millstone and from this gas company, whatever. You know, I want to sell you. I want to supply you with 100% of your power. You know, how's that? Is that basically what you want to do? And you're going to put these other businesses, these companies, generation plants out of business? So let's talk about that a little bit. Because eventually they have to distribute, right? Because there's not another distribution company in Connecticut other than Eversource.
There's a couple tiny utility providers like Bosra Light and Power that do.
I think Wallingford actually has their own.
Yeah, they have their own power generation capabilities. But every utility company has RPS standards. So another piece of legislature that local governments enact or state governments enact are renewable portfolio standards. So each utility company is required to distribute a certain percentage of their total energy from renewable energy sources. So as the nation's overall energy uses expands, the need for more and more renewable energy is going to also expand. That's why this is not an overnight plan. Like, to anybody listening, this is going to take the better part of 35 years to get done. Like, if you're looking,
it's good to be upfront about that.
Yes, if you're looking for overnight magic, like,
and any good plan usually does take time and effort.
Well, that's the problem. Is right now our nation only plans in 2 and 4 year increments.
Yeah,
and we're never going to get anywhere doing that, because I think we all know why. I don't want to get into that, but no, like,
it's another podcast.
Yeah, that's a completely different podcast. But you know, if we stick to this strategy consistently, and you also asked about the self-sufficiency part before. That's also why that part is so important to the development strategy of this, is because, right now renewable energy is on everybody's mind, but I want to make sure that if our focus goes somewhere else in 5 or 10 years, that this plan can still get to where it needs to go on its own.
Yeah, and I think that's my biggest thing, right? Right now, I get it, right? You're gonna raise money through government subsidies and crowd. We talked about that, right, a few times already. But now we're looking down the road, because it says you want to be self-sufficient. So I've been thinking about this as you've been talking, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the self-sufficiency is going to come from you generating the power and selling that to Eversource in this case, right, in Connecticut.
Correct.
And then they're going to pay you. So, and then is that, I mean,
not just Eversource. You can create a purchase power agreement with anybody. So, like university, so UConn is right down the road from where we're planning our first field. I can approach UConn and say, hey, would you like to purchase X amount of the energy that we're going to be generating from this field for, you know, whatever set amount of money? So you can create a purchase power agreement with anybody, and then that power is just negotiated through
This is
Eversource.
going to change the way, not just how it's generated, but how it's distributed.
Correct, 100%. But that's how nations rise and fall, is by adjusting to the landscape of all of the parts of their system. So, like, this is just the next inevitable step in energy generation. Like, if we want to get this right, because we can't keep stomping our foot on the same old centralized fossil fuel method. It's like, no, we need to decentralize and move renewable. Now, we're not going to have time to get into this today, but my vision of a completely energy independent America is driven off hydrogen and nuclear, but that's a conversation for a different
time. I wanted to touch on that a little bit later in the conversation, because I have doubts that we could run an entire nation on solar power.
You are 100%. Well, that's not necessarily true. I mean,
I'm sure the technology is going to evolve, right? But still,
Elon Musk has talked about this quite a few times. He's done the calculations and said that we could run our entire nation off of 100 by 100 square mile patch of solar field. Now, that sounds huge, but 100 square miles of land is not. I mean, have you been to some of the states in the U.S.? I mean, the problem is in distribution, because DC, or direct current, which comes from solar, as opposed to alternating current, which would come through like generators. That's a whole nother conversation. Sure. But you can't get DC energy very easily to anywhere, because you have to ramp up the amount of DC energy you have so high to transmit it. So that means that you have to convert it to AC there on site and then transmit it. And then there is such thing as transmission loss. So as you're pushing power through a transmission line, that line heats up and some of that energy is lost as heat energy. So you can't produce all of your power in a central location and then move it to the whole of the nation. All I'm suggesting is that we take that 100 square mile solar field, chop it up into tiny pieces, and then drop it surrounding very strategic disadvantaged communities, and then use that as a way to expand a network of solar infrastructure, essentially. So while I do agree with you that it's probably not viable to 100% produce the nation's power off solar, solar is going to be the method in which we are able to produce the hydrogen fuel that we need to make our next step towards energy independence, because that's one of the most efficient ways right now of creating green hydrogen is through solar electrolyzation. I don't know if you know anything about that.
So yeah, let's touch. I got another question, but I want to talk about that first. Let's touch on like what is hydrogen? How is it produced? How is it used to generate electricity and energy for people? I mean, if that's sort of where you're looking long term.
That is where I'm looking long term. The problem with me being the big picture guy is like I'm not the right person to answer a lot of these questions. I'm not a scientist. I've never been to college. The only time I've been to a college campus is for a keg party, if I'm being honest. So
where any good? Was it a good one?
I'm not. That's in my past. I'm not getting into that. I don't drink any. I've been sober over a decade.
Good for you, man.
Thank you. Yeah. A lot of people are surprised, but they're like, "Really?" And I'm like, "No, no, I've never been to college. I'm a self-taught man."
Good for you. That's good.
Okay, but anyway, hydrogen is H2 essentially. So, everybody knows water is H2O.
Yeah.
Liquid hydrogen is just cooled down H2, or vapor hydrogen is just H2 at ambient temperatures on the surface of Earth. The way that you end up with H2 versus H2O is through a non-instantaneous chemical process of essentially cracking the oxygen molecule away from H2O. And the way that you can do that is by running a low-grade current through water over a period of time, and then eventually that oxygen molecule decays off of the H2O, and it's attracted to something called a cathode. So you have 2 points, a positive and a negative point, an anode and a cathode, and then as your H2 and your oxygen move away from each other, one is attracted to the anode, one is attracted to the cathode, and then you can gather your H2 vapor, condense it, cool it, whatever you need to do. That
sounds clean and safe. I mean,
yeah, well, and again,
maybe than other options,
because that's one of the arguments I hear about hydrogen a lot is, it's explosive and it's and it's like, well, yes, but so is a lot of the like natural gas and if we discovered gasoline today, we would make it illegal. 100%.
Yeah, interesting.
So like to make that argument against an emerging like hydrogen technology, it's like, how about we take a few risks and develop the technology that we need to for storage and cooling and distribution, and then let's judge it. Like, let's give it a little bit of time before we start throwing accusations at things. So, but that is the model in which I see us reaching our green energy future, is using the nonprofit model of solar development, spreading a field of solar infrastructure across the United States, and then once we don't need that top half of money to expand anymore, take that energy that we were selling and devote it to cracking hydrogen fuel. Because then you're solving your residential energy issue and your transportation energy issue at once. Because we talk about energy generation in terms of energy independence, but most of the petroleum usage that we have is going into our transport fleet, not our household usage. So we need to figure out a way to solve both of these issues, and the plan that I'm trying to implement is attacking this both. I don't like any plans that only fix one problem. I like my plans to fix multiple problems.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. Yeah. And you're gonna have to talk to people that have more knowledge in this to really,
because
this is really interesting. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. So, but why would is hydrogen a more efficient way of producing energy? Like, how does that all?
If it depends on
I know you're not a scientist, but
it depends on the system in which you're using it in. So hydrogen is actually very versatile. So hydrogen itself actually stores energy inside of it. So you can take hydrogen and put it in a tank that has a hydrogen membrane and actually produce DC electricity in the same exact way that a like a neocadmium battery inside of an EV would. So you can create hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. So you obviously still need to replace the hydrogen that you're putting into the fuel cell as you take the energy out of it. But like, then all you're left with is just water, because as you're creating that electricity, it's bonding oxygen back to the H2 molecule. Or you can use hydrogen or H2 as a combustible. Now, when you take hydrogen or H2 and cool and condense it, I forget what the exact temperature is. It's like negative 220 or 240 degrees. It actually becomes a liquid combustible fuel source that's 3 times more energy dense than gasoline.
Okay.
So if we could perfect the storage systems like on transport vehicles to actually keep that sort of fuel cool, I mean, you're talking about creating transport distances 3 times further than what you could get with gasoline, and way further than you could get with an EV.
Yeah.
And I just want to make it clear, I have nothing against EV vehicles.
Sure.
I think they have a place.
Sure.
That place is just not for cross-country transport.
Yeah.
Like the geographic layout of America is far different than any other place in the world.
Yeah.
So like we need to create unique strategies for here in the United States, not just what works in Europe or
Sure.
Anywhere else.
Why couldn't each household have its own hydrogen fuel cell?
It could. In fact, there's many ways that this could go. And I'm going to start to sound like a crazy person because a lot of these technologies are off in the future. And I just want to make it clear, like, my end goal is simply nonprofit solar development and then long-term hydrogen development. But there are new systems coming out of wireless energy transmission, like Tesla towers, but on a large scale. Obviously, a ton of research is going to have to be done to the safety of the energy that you're transmitting through airwaves.
That's a whole nother.
That's a whole different thing.
I'm not even going down that road.
Again, I'm not a scientist, so or
I just put my phone on that little disc and like with no wires. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah, but I mean, same-ish idea.
Right.
Like we know it can be done.
Right.
Or as you said, if we could really perfect localized power generation, or even if we could perfect localized hydrogen production, I mean, because you could theoretically transport hydrogen or H2 in the same exact way that you transport natural gas.
Sure.
So hydrogen boilers already exist. Hydrogen, heaters already exist. So you could technically replace all of your city infrastructure, your natural gas pipelines, with H2, and then have a completely renewable source of a combustible fuel source. It would take a lot.
Wow.
A lot of infrastructure development, a lot of technological innovation. That's not my area. I'm just saying, in my opinion, I believe that hydrogen is the fuel source of the future.
But what you're doing right now is this is something that's viable. It's technology that's used widely, right? Solar panels are everywhere.
Correct.
And you're just basically doing the same model that's being done right now. You just make it's a nonprofit. And you're making it, I know that's really simplified everything, but
you're not wrong.
But that's kind of where you want. And as technology evolves, you'll tackle that when it gets here. But you are thinking about it already.
Well, we all should be.
Yeah.
Again, like if we say that we as a nation want to see a world where we don't use fossil fuels anymore, okay, let's at least pick a direction.
Yeah.
Not just, we don't want to use fossil fuels anymore. Okay, great. Like, I agree with you, but how are we getting there?
Yeah.
So, like, what I'm trying to say is anybody who's listening to this or anybody who eventually will hear this is, I think I know how to get us there. And I know that sounds like the most arrogant statement on the face of the planet, but it's,
that's where it starts.
That's where it starts.
Yeah.
It's, again, our style of solar development is much like the for-profit, except we are replacing the investor and shareholder portion of upfront investment with donations. Because we're a 501c3, corporations and businesses and even, everyday people can donate to us, to a charity that is more efficient than any other charity that exists in the United States. We can build the solar infrastructure that is going to support energy development for generations to come. And then down the road, we will also pivot that energy generation into solving our transportation fuel issue.
If you think about it, not only will these individual families and whatnot, and even businesses get that tax benefit, but down the road, it's going to pay even more because they're going to get electricity either highly reduced or free.
Correct. So like, you want to talk about an Inflation Reduction Act? This is how we do it. And this is another thing I've been thinking about too. Is you know what universal basic income is? Like the concept of universal basic income.
Yep.
I mean, I guess for anybody who's not aware, it's essentially the idea that we should take a portion of tax dollars, break that up, and then give every American citizen like a paycheck every month, or whatever it turns into. And I understand why like a lot of the nation is opposed to that. They don't, especially the people who think that they work really hard and have to struggle. It's like, I get it. So I could never sell half of the country on giving away money. What I can sell the entirety of the country on is taking away a bill that people would already have to pay.
Nobody likes paying an electric bill.
Correct.
Especially here.
It's like we're not giving anything out for free.
Yeah.
So that it's like you can't abuse the system really, because you would have to have an energy usage and we just deduct your total. Like that's all we're doing. So it's, in my opinion, one of the most efficient forms of not only charity, but like a social outreach program that you could possibly have. Especially because we're not just targeting, we're targeting disadvantaged communities to start, but as our network of infrastructure expands, like that bar is going to rise. So yeah, we're starting with disadvantaged communities, but then eventually we're going to be able to hit the lower middle class and the middle class until eventually everybody, like the idea of residential energy or paying for residential energy just goes away.
And people are born and it's
just the way life is.
Yeah. Which is really an interesting concept if you think about it. Like, anyway, that's another subject.
Oh my God, I could talk about that for hours.
Yeah. I said that comment and I lost my question.
Quite all right.
That's okay. So I talked about EverSource and the distribution part, because this is still kind of a thing with me. So in a sense, yeah, you're going to work with electric distribution companies, whether that be a local one, like we mentioned, Wallingford, or other communities, Yukon, for instance. I don't know where they get their electricity from. But could towns come to you, be like, listen, we want to work with you. We want to generate. We want to have our own electricity generation system. We want to sort of disconnect from corporate and everything. So is that still sort of questions need to be answered about that? I mean, it sounds like that you're not going to stick with just like, nope, we're going to partner with EverSource and they're going to distribute it. You're very open to how your energy gets distributed. Do I have that right? Or expand on that?
Yes and no. I think I don't know what the landscape of the power distribution might look like to adapt to this program. But for right now, the way that I want to start it anyway, is because I don't want to make enemies while I'm doing this. No. I need everybody on board. So instead of people like never having to pay any money for energy, what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to pay the utility provider the delivery fee. So whatever it cost EverSource to get our energy from our field to your house, you're still going to be responsible for having it delivered. Okay. So that way EverSource is still making the money that they would have made getting power from somewhere else.
Because otherwise they won't have incentive to buy it.
Correct. And that's not the way I want this to work. I in no way, shape, or form want to, because in reality, if local governments really wanted to, they could technically legislate a social welfare bill that would force utility companies, but there's already a tenuous relationship between utilities and local governments as it is. So I don't want to, cloud those waters at all.
Yeah.
I want to work with local policymakers to create like charitable purpose net metering arrangements that will help us bank more and more of this energy. But I also want to deliver it in a way which is beneficial, not necessarily beneficial, but status quo for utility companies. So they're still going to make the money that they would have for getting energy from point A to point B.
So people will have free energy, but they still have to pay for the delivery of that energy.
Correct.
Do you anticipate sort of increase delivery rates? I mean, that would be something that would have to be regulated. I'm sure it already is.
Lowered, actually.
Lowered, okay.
Only because we do not, we're going to cast a transmission radius around our fields just to make sure that the energy that we're producing is being used in the most effective way as possible. So instead of, taxpayer A having to pay a delivery fee getting their energy brought from New Hampshire, they're now only paying a delivery fee having their energy, from the town next door or 2 towns away. So it's going to lower that delivery fee because your energy is coming from a closer location. But it's not hurting the utilities because that delivery fee is just calculated based off how much energy and how far, essentially. So nothing's changing on their end. And really their grids are stressed right now for power production. Any means of extra power generation that we can put onto the grid is a good thing. And then because we're enacting this plan over 35 years, the changes aren't going to be as sharp as everybody might think they are. 10 years down the road, as we start to implement and this starts to expand, things are going to change and adapt to those systems on their own. We get caught up on looking at things today and right now,
Sure.
but it's these sorts of things need to simmer and, permeate the way that they're going to into our society. So I don't have a great answer other than I want to keep things status quo on the utility end and then, work with local lawmakers to try to grease the wheels of power distribution at the legislative level.
Okay. So if you were going to build next week or next year or next month or whatever, where are you looking? You mentioned Andover. Is that sort of a viable spot right now? Maybe one of the first builds?
Yes.
And then when? I mean, when do you hope to, start building?
It's very soon, actually. I hope to break ground first thing in the spring.
Wow.
Well, I guess we haven't said this yet, but we have our first major GoFundMe going live on August 1st. So by the time, this episode goes out, it'll be right around that same time. Our website's going live around that time. So that first chunk is for our corporate stand-up costs, but also for the land acquisition and site development for that first field that we're looking at in Andover. That's around 120 acres. I'm estimating we can get anywhere between 12 and 20 megawatts, which means based on our distribution plan, we will be able to cover 100% of the energy usage in Andover, Connecticut, and then about 12 to 15% of Willimantic.
So about how many households? What'd you say? What's the output?
Of a 100 megawatt
100
field, we
megawatt.
can cover a little over 16,000 households.
Okay, that's good.
But for a field that size, you're only looking probably about 2,000 to 2,500 households.
Okay.
The nice thing about targeting disadvantaged communities, and I guess nice might not be but areas that have a lot of low-income housing and apartments have a lot lower average energy usage than, your big houses that you find otherwhere. So targeting disadvantaged communities, we're going to be able to stretch the energy that we're producing to many more households than our calculations are initially estimating.
And how are people going to, what's going to happen? So this is, you shovels in the ground in spring, however long it takes to build out, you start pushing the energy out. How are the communities going to know? Are they just going to get a bill, be like, hey, there's this new thing and you don't have to pay for this anymore? Or how do you anticipate that being rolled out? How the electricity consumers going to know the change?
So that's also going to be a pivotal part of our nonprofit is education. Because we need to get local communities and the nation as a whole on board with this development process, a good portion of our administrative funding is going to go towards I don't want to say education, but I guess notification.
I mean, they're not going to have to do anything
other than we're going to be developing our own app, or what. This is the part of this that I don't have fully figured out yet, is how people are going to register. So
okay. So it's like because you can go to the company's website now and be like, all right, I want my EverSource can generate it, or I can have X, Y, or Z generated. So you're going to be one of those X, Y, Zs.
Yes.
Okay.
And then the thing I need to figure out how to do is when people go to that option on, Eversource's website, we only want that option to show up for people in zip codes of the areas that we've already
Okay.
pre-established.
Okay.
So
Gotcha.
it's not going to be overly difficult. It's just going to be
I mean, people do it all the time. There's Go NetSpeed, which is they're like, you just type in your zip code and be sorry, coming soon.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. So that'll be similar.
So I guess actually one important thing to note about our developmental strategy is we're not just giving all of our energy to disadvantaged communities. So like what you just said about taking however long to build a solar field fields in and of themselves actually do not take that long to build. I mean, they're pretty simple construction. Once you have the land graded and developed, it doesn't take long for an electrical contractor to come in and set up your solar field. The reason the solar installations take so long to get grid tied is for the one reason that the grid can't accept the amount of power that they're being built. And two is zoning and voting. Because especially nowadays, a lot of these big companies who want to build solar installations in these communities, the communities are saying no. Like they're going to their zoning and development meetings and they're voting it down.
Yeah.
So to bypass that hurdle and to get the communities on board, what we've done is we've actually broken up our energy distribution into two allotments. One is a host region allotment and the other is our charitable purpose allotment. So the host region allotment is actually 25% of that bottom 50%. And that goes towards the community that agrees to host the building of the field. So like the one we're planning on building in Andover, that 25% of the overall power generated would go to them. Then the other 25% would go to the disadvantaged community in which we're targeting. Why we're doing that is to bypass that hurdle in the zoning and voting process. If you want to call it that, I mean.
So it's going into this community, and the community's like, I get it. It's like, it's not really nice land, but I still don't want that. Be like, listen, we put this in here. We're going to give you this energy. So you're hoping. I mean, it is.
I'm not going to use the B word, but who in their right mind is going to vote down a project that is going to?
But that's what it's about anyway, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it's about.
It
anyway.
is.
It's always
So,
about
yeah.
money, and in this case, it's about power. So if they can save some money on their power, they'll be like, all right, that sounds good to me.
And not only that, but as word of this spreads, you're going to get a lot of other communities who are going, hey, come build fields in our backyard. But that's what I'm hoping for is as the viability of this catches on, that the nation helps me develop at the rate that I know I need to develop at to get this done.
Yeah.
I forget what the original question was.
Yeah, I don't remember. That's okay. You keep talking about the top 20, 50, the bottom 50%, the bottom 25%, all that kind of stuff. I don't think we really touched on exactly what.
Yeah, we never got to that.
We never got to that. So what is that? Let's explain that a little bit.
So of the overall amount of energy that is generated from our fields, half of it, so 50% of it, is what we sell. And then the bottom half or the other half is what...
I'm sorry, back up again. I lost my train of thought. Steph was giving me... actually, we've been talking for about an hour, so...
Already?
Which is, blows my mind. But anyway, so I got sidetracked, so start that over again so I can grasp it.
The top half of energy is what we're going to sell through the power purchase agreements. That funding or the revenue that we gain from selling that top half of energy is rolled back into our organization, and then that funding goes towards building even further solar projects. So essentially, we were talking about the self-viability of this program. That's how we achieve
So the top half is your profit.
Our expansion funding.
Okay.
The top half will cover our administrative fees for the organization, and then the rest of it. There are some smaller things. So like, do you know what a capital expenditures fund is?
I mean, yeah. I mean, not in full detail, but I
so
grasp the idea.
So for anybody listening, a capital expenditures fund is like, they're common with like local governments or just governments as a whole, or even corporations. It's like when you're going to have a long-term expenditure, you start investing so you can meet by that timeline passes, you are able to have the cost of that expenditure. So a portion of each of the fields is going to be designated into an investment portfolio. And then over the 25 years, that 3 to 5% that we're devoting to the investment portfolio we will have the amount of money that we need to replace that field.
Okay.
Because the lifespan of solar installations is only 25 to 30 years, we want to make sure that these fields are maintaining and then replacing themselves
Which
as
is
well.
really a big problem. And we talked about it in the beginning of this conversation of infrastructure in this
Yeah.
country. Like we build a bunch of stuff and then there's no money set aside to maintain it.
So my plan has a capital expenditures plan built in. So as soon as our fields start to degrade, we have the capital that we need to replace all of our photovoltaic panels. Not only that, but we're going to have additional overhead, which is going to go towards the hydrogen production facilities long term. So this is something that we're thinking about up front. And as long as we're smart about it over time, we only need to devote 3 to 5% of our upfront revenue from each of our fields, and we'll be able to accomplish that no problem. And then a portion of that is going to go towards administrative overhead, and then
which is going to be low,
which
based
would
on
be,
what your comments
which would be
earlier.
very low.
Yeah.
And then, so I would estimate 35 to 40% of the rest of it is going to be rolled into the construction of even more. So what we're trying to do is to create a snowballing green energy portfolio of publicly owned solar infrastructure. So a self-expanding net of publicly owned solar infrastructure. And then the other half of energy is what is banked with local power providers and then distributed as our charitable approach.
That's interesting because you talked about corporations, right? They have to answer to their shareholders,
Yeah.
but you have to answer to the entire public. I mean, that's the goal.
Technically the state, but yes.
As far as like, you have a corporation and, it's like, how come, our shares went down, but you got to answer the state for regulations and stuff. But as far as the product,
Yeah.
right? Like, because you said this is a publicly owned, and essentially it is, right?
Yep.
So, that's you have to answer to them like everybody.
But I want that. Like
Yeah.
I want
No,
to,
that's a good thing. That's what I'm saying.
I want to
Yeah.
be a forward-facing charity in like the fullest sense of the concept. Like when we integrate, I don't have any of it set up yet because I've been so busy, but when we finally integrate our social media aspect of this, I want to create a social media experience that is an interactive experience to the development process of this entire thing. So over the course of the next 3 decades, anybody who wants to know how this plan's going, just go check out our social medias. We'll be, updating the country on, new companies that we're going to be working with, any politicians or government agents that are, helping us get this thing. So this is actually in the best interest of a lot of politicians and government agents
Sure.
as well, because if they want to take credit for paying people's energy bills, I don't let them. I don't care.
Yeah.
Like I don't care about the clout. I just care that we get this plan done. So I want to create an interactive development experience through social media that the entirety of the American public can interact with. So like I hope that's the case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love it. A little bit, you say I'm sorry, a little bit off topic, but not really. Photovoltaic panel, solar panel.
Correct. Photovoltaic PV is just a solar panel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Just want to make sure. Just want to
Yeah.
clarify. That's
Yeah.
we're all talking about the same panel.
Correct. Because I was an electrician, I get the technical term of it.
Yeah.
You just have a cell that's excited by solar radiation,
Right.
which creates an electron, which goes, it's a whole.
I was a kid. Oh God, I was like, you still can buy them, but back then, you get this little, it's like a game board. It's like this big board, and you have all the little strands of wires, and they had like this. You had a solar panel. This little tiny solar panel, and back in the day, you just shine a light on it, and it would ring the bell or whatever it was supposed to do. I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And now they're like on major scales. These solar panels. That's kind of cool. What is and we talked about this when we first met. You're starting with solar. You're going to go to the hydrogen. We touched on nuclear, and we can talk about that in a minute, but I don't want to talk about that right now. What I want to ask you about is, because I'll tell you my opinions maybe, but there's a lot of production of windmills currently. Do windmills fit into your game plan?
I do remember
why?
you asking me this.
Yeah.
And my answer remains the same, and that's I know absolutely nothing about windmills, so I can't comment. And no, they're not currently.
Okay.
I would have to look into it a lot more before I had an opinion one way or the other.
Okay.
I think it's a viable strategy, but every strategy has risks associated with it. And whether it has more or less than solar or any, like, I don't know.
But I think your which I like, your attitude is like, listen, yeah, we're doing solar now, but you're not saying like this is the end all be all.
Correct.
This isn't going to solve our problems.
If 5 years
but right now this is a good start.
Yes, if 5 years down the road, like, I'm open to suggestions too. It's
Sure.
like, once I get this ball rolling, if we decide that we need to pivot in a certain direction, like, we're not stuck on this. I'm just trying to tell the nation, I think I can get us to where we need to go, is essentially what I'm saying.
This is a good start.
Yeah, this is a good start.
Yeah, yeah. So we're kind of late in the conversation here, which is really good because it's been really interesting. But do you see nuclear power, because there's a real big, back when I was growing up, nuclear power was a really big deal. Everything was going to be powered by nuclear, but there's a problem with the waste and all that kind of stuff. But it turns out, again, I didn't do a lot of research, but just things I've read here and there, the waste isn't as big of a problem as people think it is or thought it was. It's easy to take care of. Not easy, but it's manageable. Let's
Correct.
put it that way. But people are still really scared of nuclear power, and I'm pretty much a proponent of nuclear power. And the biggest reason is, if you think about it, and I think somebody told, it might have been you, actually, you might have said this, I don't know, somebody told it to me, but it's like we have, our sailors are underneath the ocean in these nuclear submarines for months at a time.
Correct.
I've never once heard of a nuclear sub blowing up. Maybe it's happened. God forbid, I hope it never does. And we've obviously had, Chernobyl and 3 Mile, all those things, but that was really old nuclear technology. And I think our nuclear technology has come a long way. Again, I really don't know. I have no idea. But just from living and being on this earth, right, and seeing the technology that's growing. What do you see nuclear power coming into the? You're not going to rule it out. Let's put it that way, or maybe you will.
No. In fact, I would like to see probably like half of the nation's energy, the portion of the nation's energy that is being used for industrial and commercial purposes, I would love to see come from nuclear power plants.
I think there's is it? You know what? Sorry, but I think there's the data centers, all these big, giant data centers like Amazon, I think is one of them.
Yeah.
I think maybe Meta, Facebook, I think they're one of them. But I think they're partnering with nuclear, whatever, to generate strictly for their because they need so much energy. They need a ridiculous amount of energy, these data centers.
Yes, especially with the emergence of AI, in our society, we're more and more, our energy requirements are just going to keep ramping up and up and up. So it's important that we meet those needs with innovative solutions, and instead of just falling back on the old way of doing things. Now, as with most things in our society, this issue comes almost completely down to perception. With things like 3 Mile Island at Fukushima,
Fukushima, yeah, I forgot about that one.
And I understand why people are scared. For the same way that after, we dropped the bombs during World War II, up until the end of the Cold War, people were still terrified of a nuclear threat. Thankfully, that's subsided in recent years, but I think that collective trauma that we felt as a species, we're also going to have to shake off in terms of power production, because so many innovations have been. I just saw a report this morning, I think, that China just achieved the first meltdownable reactor just because it operates at low enough temperatures that a meltdown is impossible. Here in the United States, they've been experimenting with thorium rod nuclear reactors, which are much cleaner, and they're actually much more efficient in terms of fuel source. There's tons of innovation. Yeah. So, but again, it's a perception thing. So even though the problem with nuclear is it's very expensive because you need oversight and you need personnel, I never see nuclear moving under the nonprofit umbrella. So I would like to see renewables under the nonprofit umbrella and nuclear, under the for-profit. I think those two would work very well together. But what I can do is, as I educate myself with this more, and, my whole life now is going to be dedicated to this plan. So I want to educate the American public. Just, are there risks associated with nuclear? Sure, but like there's risks associated with everything.
I like your analogy with the gasoline. Like
Yeah, it's
right? Which is it's crazy flammable, obviously.
Yeah. So like we need to let go of the old paradigms is essentially what I'm saying. But a lot of our public information is driven by politics, unfortunately. So like I'm seeing a world in which we move away from that.
Let's hope so.
Yeah.
Politics really has no part in a lot of decision making. I think there's way too many politics. This is again in a whole nother conversation, but I think there's way too much politics in conversations and decision making that can just be made by us and maybe some companies and privately held and all that kind of stuff. I don't, like the mandates we talked about earlier. We can't mandate our way out of any crisis. It's just, it doesn't work.
I have a saying that a law is only effective as its ability to be enforced. So you can make as many laws as you want, but if they don't make sense and you can't enforce them, like we rely on people obeying laws as a means of enforcement. So the same thing can be applicable in terms of development strategies or anything. It's like we just need to change the perception of these technologies, of these development plans, and we'll get there. I mean, I have no doubt we'll get there.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Yeah.
Listen, man, we've been talking, I don't know, for a while, and I want to talk to you about your military experience because I think that's going to fascinate a lot of people. But
okay.
We're going to do that another day.
Sure.
If that's cool with you.
Yeah, 100%.
I'd love to have you back. And actually, there's another podcast that's a weekly podcast. I think he would love to have you on. Brian Scott Smith does a CT something. I forget. Sorry, Brian. I don't remember the name of your podcast, but it's a really good, popular podcast. So I'm going to connect you guys. I think I think he would love to talk to you. He's a little bit more news oriented than me, so he's going to have a really good conversation with you. I hope this one was good. I really enjoyed it.
I loved it.
Is there anything sort of last kind of thoughts you want to talk about before we finish up?
No, I mean, I just have like a little call to action for the American public, if you don't mind. So as we've been discussing this, last hour or so, a large portion of the success of this relies on the American public. So I just want to put it out there that, we do have a GoFundMe crowdfunding event coming out August 1st. I'm sure we can get you the link to that, or, if you want to find it yourself, it's gofundme.com/solarsecuritynet. Our website is solarsecuritynet.com. But more importantly than this, if you are really amped up about what you hear me talking about, reach out to your favorite podcaster or your favorite news host and tell them about what I'm doing and ask them to have me on. Like, word of mouth is going to go a very long way in a plan like this, and earned media is going to be invaluable for what I'm trying to do. So
like and share on social media.
Yeah, like and share. I'm hoping to have our socials up by the end of next month. So
right on.
Yeah.
Benjamin, awesome talking to you, man.
Yeah, you too.
We're definitely going to do it again, and send me all that information. We'll put it in the description, and this will be up soon, and good luck to you. I think it's awesome. I'm excited.
Thank you,
man.
Thank you so much.
All right. See you. Bye, everybody.